Hello there, welcome to the video. Today we will be looking at one of the more underrated openings out there called the Colle System. And it's a lot of fun, especially for a D4 opening. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. And we start with D4, the first move for white. And what we're going to look at here, it doesn't necessarily matter how black replies. This is a system opening, the Colle system, sort of like how the London system, in that opening, you can basically play your first 8-something moves no matter what your opponent does. It's a lot like that here in the Colle system. I will give you black's most common reply, d5. And now to start off, we want to go knight f3. Let's say they go knight f6, very common. And now here we play e3. And this is going to be very, very similar to the London system in which you bring the bishop to f4 and then play e3. So this is just going to be a move faster, leaving the bishop on c1. But don't worry, it will be a factor later on perhaps. It will be opened up later. Now let's say they go with common move e6 for now. We play c3, and now look at this little pyramid of pawns that we have built here. This is part of the system we are building. And next up, we bring the bishop to d3, knight to d2, and castle. And this is basically the Colle system altogether. All right, these are all the moves you play to get this system. All right, and black can play anything they want here. They could develop the bishop and castle. They could develop on the queen side, or they could push the c pawn. Let's say they do that. That's the most common here. No matter what, your next few moves are going to be the same, and the move order doesn't even matter that much as long as you get all of these moves played. All right, so let's say bishop d3. All right, common move here for black is knight c6. Now we play knight on b to d2, and now black will play bishop d6, we castle, and they castle. And all right, we have the Colle system set up. This is the traditional Colle system. There are some other versions of this, but this is the traditional line. What have we been doing here? What is the point of this system? That's what we need to decide. What makes this different from the London system, aside from, the bishop not being out here? Instead, it's not moved yet. So the thing that pretty much all of our moves have helped us with, based on how we have developed, is we're developing towards the center. And there's one key square that we continuously have been targeting, and that is the e4 square. All right, so that is going to be a very, very important square in this game. It is basically the reason we have played all our moves so far. We have our pyramid of pawns for our pawn development and center control. We bring our knight to d2, bishop to d3, both targeting the e4 square. A lot of people would play e4 right now. I'm not going to recommend that to you. If you play e4 right now, there is the chance that they find takes here, and then you have to recapture, and then they trade stuff off here. And it's not that this is bad. I mean, this is completely even, pretty much. But now you have what we call an isolated center pawn, and that's going to be rather weak. It's going to be something for them to target the rest of the game, and you're not really going to get the same play here as you would in the line I'm going to recommend. So back to this position, I'm going to tell you to play rook e1 to further threaten e4. All right, see, all of our developmental moves, bishop d3, knight d2, rook e1, they are all supporting our e4 pawn push in the near future. There's not a clear most popular move here for black. In general, though, the thought process for them is going to be, I need to develop this bishop. And maybe they'll go bishop d7. If they do, that's just super, super boring and passive. It's not going anywhere. b6 is very, very common, however. So let's say they play b6, and now we play e4. Now, the reason they can't do what they did before, instead of, if we had played e4 last turn before playing rook e1, I said they would take. It's possible they still do that. However, since we have the rook on e1, now we have time to play e5. Rook and knight both supporting the pawn, so they can't capture it without losing material. But also, this is a fork, so if they don't capture it, they're getting captured. Either way, we are going to go up material here. They'll probably just take, and then we take, and then if they take, now this is where the rook coming to e1 really helps us out. So we win material in that line. So back here, that means they can't play c takes d4. Instead, most people, by far, will capture the pawn, because that is the logical thing to do. Not a bad move at all. One of the best moves there. And you want to capture with your knight. Capturing with your bishop kind of ruins the whole plan. Do not capture with the bishop, capture the knight. I'll show you why in just a moment. Now let's suppose they make the best and most common move, knight captures knight. We're going to go bishop captures knight, all right? And this is already a very, very good position for white. All right, the only way black is going to get through this is if they find basically every best move by Stockfish, and if they do that, they're either very well versed in theory or they're cheating. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. Instead, I would assume they're going to guard the knight by playing bishop b7 because that is what the large majority of players do. And this plays right into a losing continuation. All right, we have a very, very nice tactic here. If you can find it, it's very, very cool, and we have the pieces set up just for it. We're going to play bishop takes h7. And try to keep this idea in mind, by the way. This isn't just, exclusive to the Colle system. This is an idea that pops up in some other openings as well. So this is very good to know. So we've captured a pawn with check. If they move out of check, then, well, we just gained a pawn, and we can always retreat the bishop anyway. If they capture the bishop, as basically everybody would, you have knight g5 check. All right, now they have three options. If they go king g8, we're going queen h5 immediately, and the only way they aren't getting checkmated is if they give up their queen for the knight, which is not exactly pleasant. Maybe they'll play this to try to create room to run away, but we have check, forcing king h8, come back here, forcing king g8, check, forcing king f8, check, forcing king e7, and then finally queen takes g7 with the checkmate. So very nice finish to that game. If they try to run away, they cannot do so. We will force them to be checkmated. Now let's go back to this position. King g8 just loses by force. If they try king h6, well, I don't think we're complaining with knight takes f7 check at the very least, or double check, in fact. But the point's going to be that we're also attacking the queen. So when they move their king to get out of check, we go in and take their queen. Going to be a very, very easy win from there. And then there's king g6. Not too many are going to be brave enough to bring their king out to g6 of all squares. If they do, you need to play h4. And you're threatening to go h5 check, which would bring the king further out into the board onto a bad f6 square, or just onto the h6 square where we said they don't want to go, lined up with the bishop and knight, with the tactics there. And maybe your queen is coming to d3 with a check. Not really sure what they're supposed to do here. This looks terrifying. Their king's in a terrible spot. You're technically down material, but your position is crushing here. So let's go back a little bit, because this position is kind of the key position. If they find queen c7, then they're supposed to be okay. If we follow the same line, then there's going to be a difference here somewhere. Their queen being on this square helps a lot. I believe they're going to be able to just run away and barely survive, and being up material is going to justify it. So that's still playable even if they find the best move. Not really much to fear there. Not many people are going to play that, I assure you. Let's go a little further back, because there are some other options here. Back in this position, not everybody plays bishop d6. This is kind of a big debate if you play black in this position. It's where do you put the bishop? D6 or e7? And it does matter a lot for white which square they go to. So if they play e7, this does slightly change the game. Now, let's say we castle, let's say they castle, and we could do the same rook e1 thing perhaps. However, it's probably a bit better to go queen e2 this time, and I'll show you why. Because we're not going to have the same sort of tricks in this line. All right, we could play rook e1, and now let's give them the same b6 move, and we play all the same moves as last time. But I think this time it's going to go differently. Say takes, and then we take. This time they should be able to throw in this without much to fear. And then if we recapture, we have an isolated pawn. In the other line, we would be able to go knight takes knight, and they would have to take with their queen because the bishop wouldn't be there. And then we could take back with our knight, and then we would be doing just fine in that line. But it's a little different with the bishop on e7. Let me go back and show you that. If bishop d6, castles, rook e1 here, takes. So this position is the same thing except the bishop is here this time. In this scenario, we could go knight takes knight. If they go pawn takes, which they should, it's, well, kind of rough over there. If they go queen takes, they actually will lose their queen to this trick. The bishop attacks this way, our other bishop takes away squares. You can take a look at this for as long as you want. You can pause the video if you'd like. The queen has nowhere to go. There's no way out for their queen. Every square is covered by one of our pieces. So it really does make a difference where they put their bishop. So we go back a little bit. We go back to this position, and we play all of that out with rook e1, b6, e4, takes, and this time they can throw this in, and we don't have knight takes f6, because then they capture with their bishop, which then helps the attack on d4. There's not really any play here, and one small inaccuracy leads to them having the advantage. So, all that aside, that's why I'm going to tell you in this line, switch to queen e2. And it's going to be different. I'll show you how. It's b6 again. That is the common move here. We play e4, they take, you take, and perhaps they take on d4 again, right? That's possible. But there's a difference with your queen being on e2 instead of having the rook come into e1, is here you can play knight takes knight because you have a follow-up with queen e4. All right, you've lined up your queen and bishop, you threaten checkmate in 1. If they don't stop checkmate in 1, then I mean, you're celebrating. That's fantastic. Go checkmate them. If they decide to defend the hanging knight, for example, free win. There you go. Now, if they stop the checkmate, well, free knight. So you win either way, right? One is more satisfying, perhaps, but either way, you're going to be happy with the result of that. Which means back here, this is not an option for them. So I'll give you the most played move here. It's bishop to b7. And now here, this is going to be a barely found move. Most people will trade knights, and it's just kind of equal. If you can find knight on f3 to g5, you're going to get a pretty solid position, because most people are going to be very quick to play h6. That's the instinct move right here, and it's not a bad one. It makes a lot of sense. Kick the knight out, but we have some very nice tactics here. All right, we trade knights now. If they go pawn takes, then say thank you and ruin their structure. Bishop takes is very likely. Throw in queen e4, intermezzo move. You threaten checkmate, so they don't have time to take your knight. If they do, then checkmate them and say thanks. What they're more likely to do is play g6, and now you have a very nice move, knight takes e6. All right, very nice tactic, and surprisingly enough, most people do just take the knight, but then you're taking on g6, and king h8, queen h7 is checkmate, so they have to play bishop g7 to block. You check, all right, and they run to f7. You bring the bishop in for the check. If the king runs to e7, you capture the bishop, and you're doing great. So they have to run here to have pretty much any chance at this. However, very nice move here. Drop your bishop back to h5 with the threat of queen g6. This bishop is not very happy right now. Not a lot of space to work with. It's going to be very difficult for black to find a good move here. Maybe they'll try to prevent queen g6. Say they go knight e7, for example. That controls the square. Well, no big deal. Let's come along and take this pawn, adding a new threat to the bishop. They're going to take, you're going to take, and look at the king. The only place the king can move to is f5, and you know if you're chasing the king out to f5 in an equal material game, you're probably doing something right. So there you go. If they block with the knight, well, you take the knight. So that seems pretty good, I would say. That's a pretty nice line. It won't necessarily go that way. That is kind of the hope, and that is also with the common moves being played by black. So you have a good chance at getting a game like that. Now, I want to go back to one other position here that could very commonly happen. It's back here, where initially I said e6 would be played, because that is the most played move. But right behind that, there's also bishop g4. And this is going to be very different from the other lines here. Now, technically, you could continue with your normal Colle system moves, you know, c3, bishop d3, knight d2, castles, and then play for e4. And that would be totally fine. This is going to be one of the few times I recommend something slightly different. All right, if they come here with the pin on your knight, I want you to play h3. All right, kick the bishop out. If they capture your knight, no big deal. Recapture with your queen, and then start playing your Colle system moves, and you're going to get a good game. Very nice and simple. However, most people are going to play bishop h5, and I want you to keep chasing the bishop for a moment. Go g4. Everybody's going to play bishop g6. If they sacrifice the knight, it's basically for nothing. You can just take and be happy with your material advantage. Assuming they play bishop g6, you are now going to play knight e5. Very nice knight in the center. You are attacking the bishop. That's your intention is not to capture the bishop with the knight, but it is nice to have as an option. You know, if they try to play h6 or h5 to give the bishop, you know, a flight square on h7, that would be the time that you take the bishop. You know, say h6, this is a good moment for you to capture the bishop, double up their pawns, and now this is extremely weak. You know, bishop d3 immediately would be very strong. And I mean, if they want to protect the pawn, they might need to play king f7, and if that's a move they need to play, they're in trouble. So back here, let's say they play a more normal move such as knight d7. That's extremely common here. So, like I said, our intention is not to capture the bishop with our knight. It's good that we have that ability, but it's not our plan. No, our actual plan is to play h4. We are going to try to trap the bishop here, all right? Now, I'm going to give them just a random move that's not going to affect the position. Let's say a6, so you can see how this plays out. We go h5. The bishop's only flight square is e4. Okay, nice. They're attacking our rook. However, we play f3, and you got to be okay with our pawns being all moved up like this. because while our king is not the safest at the moment, they don't really have a way to come in and attack. You don't have to worry about that right now, especially considering we are trapping a bishop and winning it. There's no escape for them. There's no counterplay for them. They are simply losing a piece, and we are happy with that. So that is the threat here. Now, as for what most people play, they actually just take the knight, which is a pretty big mistake because now this is a threat in addition to, trapping the bishop. So that doesn't play out very well. If you get this position, again, while your pawn structure isn't the prettiest, you are gaining a piece and they have no way to come after your king. So you're all good there. Now, perhaps they try something more sensible. The question would be, what would they even try? At this point, they're probably limited to moving the h-pawn up, let's say h6, but like we've already said, that's when you take the bishop with your knight and then go attack the g6 pawn, because this is extremely weak. In fact, if they, if you catch them slacking here and they aren't paying attention, say they go c5, I mean, you could win the game right here. I don't think that's super likely, but it's certainly possible. All it takes is for them to stop paying attention for one move. Of course, if they play king f7, I mean, it's not as great as checkmating them, but this is still a very pleasant position. That's basically the main stuff you need to know about the Colle system. So if we want to go back through that again, we start with d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, just for the common moves here. We're putting in black's most common moves to show you the system for white, e3, e6, and for white, you start with c3 to build your pawn pyramid here, similar to the London system. Now we'll say black goes c5. And again, pretty much no matter what black plays from around here, you're gonna be able to play your Colle system and get the same moves in with bishop d3, knight d2. It doesn't even matter which order you go in most of the time, you're gonna be able to get those moves in. I would prefer bishop first. We'll say they go knight c6, bring your knight to d2, they bring their bishop to d6, you castle, they castle, you want to go for rook e1, and your whole idea is to play for e4, play in the center, open things up. This is not your standard d4 pawn game. All right, most d4 games are just very solid, sometimes admittedly very boring. This one seems to be a bit more open and fun once you get to this part of the game and you get e4 in. So I definitely recommend the Colle system to you guys. I hope you've learned a thing or two about it. It's a very nice option if you're interested in branching out and trying something new. So there you go. Congratulations on learning how to play the Colle system. And by the way, if you're interested in learning how to win with move 1 b3, then click the video here and you can learn about that. So there you go. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.